you say that again and say, I give you permission? That'd be great.
Yeah. Yep. You've got my permission.
Okay, super. So I sent you the questions that I had kind of developed. Our unit for this week in driver's education is to think about the laws, regulations, all the signs, signals, roadway markings that drivers use in order to obey the laws and that do that sort of thing. And so we were supposed to construct 10 to 12 questions to interview a police officer about. And so I sent you those questions that I kind of had. You could think about them ahead of time. So that's really kind of where they came from. But why don't you just give us a little bit of, or me, a little background about yourself? Like, how did you become a part of the police department? And
Sure. Yeah. So I've been with the police department for 19 years, all here at Lenexa. So I was a patrol officer. Of course, we all start at the same level. We all start in patrol. So I did that for 7 years and worked the shift work and everything that goes along with working patrol, crashes, arresting people, all that. And then after that, I was a school resource officer for about 10 years. And I worked at probably 7 or 8 different schools, primarily at the elementary level, teaching safety education and some of community policing type things. Worked at one middle school, I guess. And then for the last 3 years, I do our public relations. So I do community education. I'm the liaison with the media. I manage social media and some of the other programs that we do with the public. So that's kind of been my career in a snapshot.
Okay. What's your favorite thing that you've done so far?
What I say is, when I was a school resource officer and now in public relations, I'm very fortunate in that I get to do positive policing. So I'm not arresting people. I'm not giving out tickets. When I show up, people are usually glad to see me, whether it's kids in a school, whether it's a coffee with cops type of an event. So not every officer has that luxury. Most of these guys are out there having to do their job, which means people aren't always happy to see them. So for the last 13 years, I've been doing community policing, and I really enjoy that a lot.
Okay, good.
In fact, just to give you an example, today, we're getting some requests from people whose kids, can't have birthday parties. And so they've asked, if we could do anything special for them. And so just this morning, I went to 2 different houses and put together like a little gift bag of, police officer coloring book and badges and stickers, and delivered those to, put it on the doorstep, rung the doorbell, went back to my car, hit the lights and sirens, and drove off. And so that was our little special thing for kids that can't have birthday parties. So getting to do fun stuff like that's very rewarding.
Yeah. Oh, that's a neat idea. I know we always appreciate you all because at our block party for our neighborhood, both the police and the fire station will come send officers out, and we always appreciate that positive interaction with the kids that get to see, see inside the car and the truck.
Absolutely.
Get up in them. So we appreciate you guys doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I enjoy that.
Okay. Well, let's learn some stuff about regulations and signs.
So real quick, back up and tell me, is this for a class you're taking or a certification, or what exactly is it?
Yes. So this is part of a certification to become a driver's education teacher. You have to take 2 courses. So this is my 2nd course. And then the 3rd is a practicum where we actually teach driver's ed course. And then at the end of those 3 courses, I'll be certified or licensed to teach driver's ed either in a high school or in a commercial driving school.
Okay, cool. Very good.
Yeah. So I have a cousin who does that, and it always kind of intrigued me. I'm a original elementary school teacher. I'm now a literacy consultant, so I'm kind of an odd duck in this, but because my cousin had done it and he's talked about it for so long, it was always kind of an interesting business idea for me.
Sure.
So I was thinking it was something that my husband and I could kind of do together. So,
yeah, absolutely. Very cool.
It's been really interesting because I have a 13-year-old son. So he's close to driving. So I'm kind of like, whoa, I'm glad I did this right now, because that seems like you don't think about all the stuff you should think about then. So yeah. So this is an assignment.
Ago, so it takes a special type of person to do that.
I don't know if it's my thing or not yet, but we'll find out, right?
Sure. All right.
Okay. So when you think about driving safety in town, what are the most common mistakes that drivers make?
So that's actually a pretty easy one based on our crashes and citations. So a lot of things don't change, and one of them is speed. People drive too fast. So I would say the top three are speed, following too closely. Most of our crashes can be attributed to people who are following too closely. Person hits their brakes and they don't have time to stop before running into the back of them. Probably the number one crash we get. And then distractions. Most people do think of electronic devices, but especially with teenagers, distractions can be other occupants. So friends, siblings, those sorts of things. So speeding, inattention or distractions, following too closely, and then failing to obey signals and signs, running red lights, those kinds of things.
Okay.
Yep. Some things never change.
That confirms what we've learned in our class. More passengers in the car for younger kids are like a bad idea, which is why they're limited, right?
Absolutely.
So
it is. Yep. Yeah. A lot of people think, it's just electronics, but really those passengers can be such a distraction, even if they're not horsing around. When you're still learning how to drive, a friend could say something like, "Oh, what's that?" And then you turn, as the driver, you take your eyes off the road to look at something on the sidewalk. And young people just haven't learned that yet. So very much occupants can be a huge distraction for young people.
Right. Are there particular hot spots in town that tend to cause a lot of ticketing or accidents?
Yeah, I mean, it would be where people would guess, and that is the most highly congested areas. So for us, 87th Street and Quivira to 87th Street and I-35, that whole interchange over there. 95th Street in Quivira, from Quivira to I-35, so in front of Sam's Club, that whole interchange there. So over the last decade, we've had major reconstructions in those areas, diverging diamonds at 95th Street, widening at 87th Street. So where there's more cars, there's going to be more crashes. So those are our two big hot spots. And then really just going down 87th and Flum, 87th and Lackman. Those are all our hot spots.
I do tend to avoid 87th Street. Just too much traffic there.
Now, you do have kind of a question here. I may be getting ahead, but I didn't include the interstate because certainly 435, I-35, those, of course, would be a lot of accidents on those roadways as well. However, primarily the highway patrol works those crashes. We work some of them. We certainly have jurisdiction, but they primarily do a good job of working those crashes. So if I included highways, 435 and I-35, that interchange. But as far as city streets, 87th and 95th, right around Quivira.
And the city's done a good job of taking that traffic data, it looks like, and converting it to physical ways or traffic patterns to try and mitigate that.
Yep,
Would you
absolutely.
agree with that? Okay.
Yeah, and that kind of touches on one of your questions too. I mean, I think in Lenexa and really all of Johnson County, our planners do a great job such that when a roadway opens or when a roadway undergoes construction, I mean, all the studies, the research, the planning has gone into it so that when it opens, it's got all the signage, the markings, things are the way it should be.
Right.
The only thing I can think of where they had to go back and add some more signage, if you remember the Johnson County Gateway, so 435 where it turns into K10, that huge curve was very sharp when the cattle, if you remember, the cattle truck tipped over, and so they had to add more signage. They had some blinking lights warning people to slow down around that curve. But by and large, a lot of planning goes into these construction zones ahead of time so that when it's open, it's good to go.
Right. That Johnson County Gateway I travel that all the time, and I'm so thankful for it every day. I still have to sometimes train my brain. I'll be like, oh, I need to go left, because I was so used to dealing with that all the time that it has helped tremendously.
Well, and what we're going to see now is it's not in our city, but it affects our city, is 75th Street is being widened. So 75th Street over I-35, right there by the hospital, is being widened. So what happens is for instance, in the evenings, northbound traffic starts to clog at 75th, and that backs into Lenexa. So that's another huge project that'll probably be over the next couple of years. But really, the planners do a great job, whether it's roundabouts or signs or markings. And there's not much we have to go do after the fact to say, oops, we forgot the sign, or we need to redesign this. They did it all in advance. Yeah.
So
And
that's
I don't know that,
question.
and I don't know that you see something that in every community. I mean, to be
Right.
honest, I don't know that you cross the state line and see that.
Right.
But I think Johnson County is, infrastructure is very important, and I think you see that in our roadways.
Right.
Yeah.
That was one of my next questions, was about roundabouts.
Yeah.
I've noticed those have cropped up quite frequently in our
Sure.
city. So I think I know the answer to it, but that was obviously very intentional. And how does it help with traffic regulation?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about a roundabout is it allows traffic to flow continuously, whereas you're not stopping for red lights and yellow lights. There's a constant flow of traffic, which allows more volume to move through at a quicker rate.
Yeah.
I can tell you a lot. I won't say a lot, but we do get periodic questions about roundabouts. Some people hate driving through them, or they just don't like the idea of them. I can tell you, we get almost no accidents through there at all.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
And I don't know where you live, but in Western Lenexa, out there by the hospital and St. James, you would think all those high school students navigating whatever it is, 5, 6 roundabouts, and we just have, although they drive too fast oftentimes, crashes just don't happen.
Yeah.
Or they rarely happen in any of our roundabouts. And that's one where you have teenagers driving through it all the time. So some people don't like them, but they really are effective.
Well, they do make you slow down. I mean, it is difficult to like whiz through a roundabout. So
yeah.
Well, that's your number one, speed being a problem.
Our concern would be intoxicated drivers, and we had one just a month or so ago there on Renner Road at about 95th Street, and where they were supposed to curve, they just drove straight and kind of launched through the air and crashed. But they were highly intoxicated. But by and large, the average driver is able to navigate those fine.
Did it involve another car, or was
Nope.
it?
No, middle of the night. Just middle of the night. Just jumped the curb and landed right in the middle of the whole thing.
Oops.
So, yeah.
Okay, what about Lenexa City Center? Were there any features specifically put into there to help with like signage, roadway stuff?
Yeah, I gave that some thought. I'm not aware of any, to be honest with you. I mean, it is an area we enforce. Just because you now have a lot of density there, and if people have been around Lenexa for a long time, that used to just be wide open, and the roadway gets kind of narrow. You've got on-street parking, and you've got not now a ton of pedestrian traffic, but you will eventually. And so that is an area where we try to do speed enforcement, because people do drive too fast through there. But in terms of any particular devices or signs, I'm not aware of anything special that we have done there on 87th Street. I mean, Renner, of course, has the roundabouts, but 87th Street, I'm not aware of anything special.
I guess maybe it's just because it's such a divided roadway. So like all the traffic that's traveling westbound is so far away from the eastbound traffic, because you have that strip of land in the middle. Maybe that's just a natural deterrent or kind of regulator.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be speed for pedestrian traffic. If people are crossing the street there. And then, because it's narrow, if you were distracted, it wouldn't be difficult to drift and then sideswipe one of those cars that's parked there right off the roadway. But yeah, speed would be our number one concern there. Speed and attention to crosswalks.
And maybe the fact that there's not very many businesses yet that are in the middle part of the division, that it hasn't reared up yet. But I bet you're right, because that's still like a 35 mile an hour speed.
It is. It slows way down. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, that's still pretty good clip to be moving through a pedestrian area. So
yeah. Yep.
Are there any problematic areas of the city related to roadway signs or signals? Might have answered that already.
Yeah, I kind of answered that. I mean, not really. I mean, I can think of very minor things. You have at a traffic light, maybe one of the lights is burned out, or somebody knocks over a sign in a car crash, and hey, that sign needs to go back up, or that light needs replaced. And here in Lenexa, it's a very quick process. Whether it's a citizen that calls in or an officer that notices it, we notify the community development who, sometimes within the same day is out there replacing the light, putting a sign back up. And then in terms of anything major, nothing jumps out at me as, areas of concern. I mean, what we find is operator error. So
Yeah.
it's not, I can't think in 20 years of many or even any crashes that we could say, well, the problem here was the lack of signage or the lack of design in the roadway. It almost always comes back to operator error.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about, can you think of any specific laws or ordinances that are difficult to enforce? And I kind of gave you my example of the golf carts.
Yeah.
So, we had to investigate particular ordinances. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'm just going to read this because I'm around it a lot. And I think, gosh, that's kind of weird. So I can see that golf carts are out of compliance quite a bit because the road, which is Prairie Star Parkway, right by Falcon Valley Golf Course, that's a 45-mile-an-hour intersection, and there are golf carts going back and forth all the time through that intersection. So
yeah, golf carts created a whole issue in and of itself. I guess it would have been probably 2 summers ago, just because the proliferation. I mean, a lot of people have them in Western Lenexa. I don't know why, but people, I guess, don't want to walk to their neighborhood pools. They have golf carts. So something that the city had to address, and they did end up legalizing them with stipulations and so forth, but not something I ever thought we would need to address. I tell you what can be hard is not so much the violation itself, but how to set up to observe the violation. So, for example, we may get complaints about people running red lights at 95th and Flum. Well, when you look at that intersection, there's no place for an officer to park to be able to observe that. So I guess what you would have to do is just sort of like fishing, just kind of drive back and forth and see if somebody, while you're right there, runs the light. No, that's not every intersection. There are some intersections or roadways where you can park somewhere and check for speed or look for violations. But there are some areas where we get complaints and there's just no great way to observe it. Another example is speeders through a neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, so as an example, if you called and said, people always speed down my block. Well, I mean, unless you want me to park in your driveway, like where do you suggest we sit? So we do other things too. We will, if you've seen those speed trailers, we call them, where it flashes your speed, we'll put those up. So what can be difficult at times is balancing complaints about a particular area, but yet there's no place for an officer to set up to observe it. Or we've had this happen where officers are, say, parked in a liquor store parking lot to check for speeders. And the business owner will tell us, get off my property. And we can't.
Uh-oh. Yeah, we froze up. I don't know why. Hope you come back.